Good. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Hillsborough Township Planning Board meeting of July 7th, 2022. Please join me in salute to the flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be advised this meeting has been duly advertised according to Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, otherwise known as the Sunshine Law. Notice of the 2022 annual meeting schedule has been provided to the officially designated newspapers, the Township Clerk, posted on the Township's website, and available here at the Hillsborough Township Municipal Complex. In addition, application documents have been made available on the Township's Civic Clerk website, and complete applications are available in the Planning and Zoning Department for inspection in accordance with the public meeting notice. With that, may I have a roll call of board members and board and township professionals, please?
Vice Chair Julian, Mr. Santa Romita, Mr. Estag, Mr. Scobo, and Committee Delcor are absent. Mr. Wagner.
Here.
Mr. Peason.
Present.
Mr. Chicarelli.
Here.
Ms. Smith.
Here.
Mayor Lapani.
Present.
Chair Schwartz.
Here.
And Mr. Maskey.
Here.
Mr. Bernstein.
Here.
Mr. DeSessa. Here. Yes. Here. 9 here.
Excellent. Okay, first up, we have consideration of a couple of meeting minutes. First up is the meeting minutes of January 9th, 2022. May I have a motion to approve?
The eligible members, Mr. Chairman, are everybody with Mr. Chicarelli.
I'll move, Mr. Chairman. I'll second.
Okay, any comments from the dais? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Wagner.
Yes.
Mr. Peason. Ms.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Mayor Lapani.
Yes.
Chair Schwartz.
Yes. Next, meeting minutes of June 23rd, 2022.
The eligible members are Mr. Wagner, Mr. Peason, and Ms. Smith.
Okay. May I have a motion?
I'll make the motion. Second.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Mr. Wagner.
Yes.
Mr. Peason.
Yes.
Ms. Smith.
Yes.
Okay. Next, consideration of resolutions. First one is Hillsborough 206 Holdings, the LLC, with file number of 18-PB-07-MSPV. It's a 2019 amended site plan. Mr. Bernstein?
Eligible members are Mr. Wagner, Mr. Peason, Mr. Chicarelli, the mayor, and yourself.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved. Second.
Any comments from the dais? Roll call, please.
Mr. Wagner.
Yes.
Mr. Peason.
Yes.
Mr. Chicarelli.
Yes.
Mayor Lapani.
Yes.
Chair Schwartz.
Yes. Next, 44 Woods Ken LLC with a file number of 21-PB-02-RDS with a reference of 07-PB-29-MR.
Same group.
Okay. Motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Any comments from the dais? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Wagner.
Yes.
Mr. Peason.
Yes.
Mr. Chicarelli.
Yes.
Mayor Lapani.
Yes.
Chair Sarachi.
Yes. Okay, we do not have any planning board business this evening, nor any consideration of ordinances, so we'll move to business from the floor for items that are not on this evening's agenda. So if there's anyone from the public that would like to address the board on any matters not on the agenda, please come forward stating your name and address for the record. And just know we had adopted rules of a 5-minute time limit.
Hi, Robert Harris, 13 Hunt Club Road, Hillsborough. My question relates to plans for a town center and Main Street. The master plan amendment stated, and I quote, "An essential change is the transformation of Route 206 from a suburban commercial strip corridor to a traditional Main Street." So now that we have the bypass open, what is the current state of plans for a town center and a Main Street? Are we moving forward on that?
We don't own 206 yet. That's still owned by the state.
So until that transfer comes over to Hillsborough and becomes a local road, that is the next step. But before we take that on, we need to have all the improvements made by the state so we inherit a complete, healthy road. And then obviously then there's other things that have to be done, obviously, as buildings become available, have them upgraded to the town center. But that's the first part of the puzzle is 206.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Don Huff. I live at 33 White Meadow Road. Thank you guys for your time again. Just wanted to bring up before we proceed with the rest of the hearing, there was an objection or a question from the floor last time we had a planning board meeting around the 2 parcels of land, and that, the question was raised, should we even consider this application tonight or going forward when it's all contingent upon something that isn't in place right now, which is both parcels of land being one. So I just wanted to open it up before we start the proceeding to see, is this a justified time to maybe vote on this and say it's not ready for application? I thought I would do it before we kick off. So thank you guys for your consideration. And is it something that we can just kind of move forward on now and kind of address before we get into the rest of tonight's meeting? So thank you.
Thank you.
Maria Janusik, 720 East Freck Avenue, Manville, New Jersey. I'm also a Hillsborough Township property owner, Block 86, Lot 3, 2155 Camp Plain Road. I have a question in regard to, is there going to be a public portion for comments about this application before this meeting is adjourned?
There will be after each, as with all proceedings, there'll be an opportunity for the public to cross-examine any of the witnesses, and then once the applicant concludes their application or any presentations, then there's the open general public comment that the public can come up and provide any of their thoughts on the application, whether pro or con.
And that will be, that time will be made available to the public today? Because I've been at several prior
I cannot,
planning board meetings.
as you know, you've been to enough of these that we don't have a rigid set schedule. We will see how the proceedings go. But considering the size of the room tonight, I'm anticipating lots of questions of any witnesses, so I am sure this is going to wind up getting carried.
I'm sorry, there's going to be lots of questions of the witnesses. Will there be time for the public? Will you end it at a certain point where there will be time for public comment about the application?
When the applicant has concluded presenting their application.
The answer is, Ms. Janusik, probably not tonight. As always, you've been to enough of these. The public comment comes when all testimony and questions are finished. Then at the very end of the application is when public comment comes, which may be tonight, next meeting, or 3 meetings from now. So until that point is, we can't tell you.
All right, so you're saying that even though I've been at meetings where we're told there will be time for public comment, no public comment is, time is
the
allowed.
testimony
That's
is
going to happen
finished.
again, that could happen again today.
That's correct.
Okay. I have submitted requests for government records through the Open Public Records Act, OPRA, for the resolution regarding the campus application, that it was denied by the planning board, and there should be a resolution memorializing that denial. I've submitted OPRAs, and I haven't gotten anything. Now, I understand that it's the responsibility of the planning board attorney, as it's in his contract, that he is responsible for memorializing resolutions once the planning board makes a decision. So why is there no resolution of the denial of the Campus Associates LLC Weiss application?
May I?
You could have,
It's like the line from Passover. So what makes this day different from all other days? The question's been asked and answered, Ms. Janusik. I don't know why the planning department hasn't provided you. There is a draft resolution that was never adopted as a resolution. The board took an action. The resolution was drafted. It was never approved by the applicant before it came before the board for memorialization, but it does exist, and I don't know what the status of your request is. I'll look into it with Ms. Paget and try to deal with it.
So I don't understand. should there be a resolution or?
There is
could that
one,
just-
I said, but it was never approved by this board. And you've been told that at least a half a dozen times at this meeting and at the township committee meetings. Nothing's changed from the situation that was reported by Judge Shanahan over a year and a half ago.
So how long does it take for the planning board to approve?
Planning board isn't going to adopt a resolution for an action that's already been overturned by the court, and a subsequent resolution approving the application was approved.
So so it went into litigation before there was a memorializing resolution stating that the board had denied that application.
It went to resolution because the board denied the application.
For what?
It went to litigation because the board denied the application.
But where was the memorializing resolution? What was given to the judge?
The draft,
So is a copy of the draft? Is there a copy of the draft available through Oprah?
again, I could have sworn I just said it. I will check with Ms. Paget as to the status of such and address it. I'm unaware you've been denied the request, so I can't answer the question as to why you haven't gotten it. But it exists.
Well, then is it something that Mr. Maskey should have available?
As Mr. Bernstein said, it was never memorialized. If you operate the final adopted resolution, it doesn't exist. If you're operating a draft resolution, that's a different document.
Okay, well, I'm going to submit an Oprah for the draft resolution. All right, thank you.
Good evening, David Brooke. Hope everybody's had a good week. Just a follow-up to Dawn's question. As you know, once the hearing resumes on Homestead, on the warehouses, you'll be soliciting testimony. And there's no opportunity for the public to be involved until the end. And so I would simply ask the question that you discussed at the prior meeting on May 12th. Is this a valid application before the planning board? Since in order to properly do a subdivision, as one of the residents testified, I think Mr. Bernstein, you commented, Chairman commented, somebody else commented, that if it's not a perfected application, then you have the right to reject. And I would ask that you, as the planning board members, take that into consideration before you begin the hearing. There is a letter requesting that I believe was written by Don, submitted to you to ask you to do exactly that. The concern that I have, and I think a lot of other residents have, is that if this application is not perfected, if there are currently two owners and a subdivision requires one owner, it's not just a mere technicality, it's a legality. And I would ask each of you to think about whether this application is properly before you and ask that you have that discussion and vote on it. Because we do not want to waste our time and our money, and I think that each of you are going to feel the same way. Why do you want to invest the time and effort in listening to testimony if in fact the application is premature? Right there, we know there are at least two or three owners. This is a subdivision. Subdivisions require single ownership. Yes, there could be some strange maneuver, but right now that hasn't happened. And so I would ask each of you to please consider that and vote, discuss and vote before you open it back up for the public hearing, simply because there is that actual letter request that has come before you. I hope you've all had a chance to take a look at it. Thank you.
Yep.
I guess I could say, can you do that, Mr. Chairman?
No.
Not at this point.
Not at this point. There's not, because there's not a pen, folks, this application, when it comes up in a few minutes after everybody asks what are you going to do before the application, because we're right now in the public portion for items not on the agenda, the issue will be discussed. But at this very moment, the board is taking no action on that issue.
Not sure if I understood that, but I'll just take your word that there is the opportunity for each of you to discuss that. I would ask.
There
I know
will be
other-
there will be an opportunity for a discussion once the application recommences.
Thank you very much.
Can we not talk about stuff that's on the agenda?
Hi, Natalie Gorman, 53 Winding Way. I have a broader question, not something specific, and it's because this process is all new to me. I've only been to a couple planning board meetings and environmental commission and township council meetings. So I'm just trying to understand, and this is a question. So when you look at each proposal, are you looking at a proposal at aggregate level? What's the impact to floods? What's the impact to traffic? What's the impact to the environment, et cetera, et cetera? Or looking at each as an individual project and what's the impact to that project, not recognizing the aggregate and the downstream effect of each thing that's happening with all the development we have going on in Hillsborough?
It's all guided by the municipal land use laws, and most of it is on the merit of the application and the zoning that's around it. There are some things that we cannot do legally,
So each one is singular.
for the most part. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. We're gonna move on. No one else coming up, so we're gonna move into the application public hearing portion, which is Homestead Road LLC, file number 21-PB-25-MS/MSPV with a time of decision of July 31st of this year. I'm not gonna read through all this, the description, but it is a continuation from the May 12th, 2022 meeting without further notice. I will just want to state some ground rules that the planning board meeting has a hard stop at 10:30. 10 o'clock will be the last time taking any new testimony. And the public will have an opportunity to cross-examine any witnesses. Just urge everyone to keep the questioning to that witness and to their area of expertise, because I know we've in past meetings have drifted, and I want to make sure everyone gets their opportunity to do their cross-examinations and get their opportunity at the mic. So with that, Mr. Ogrodnik, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Ogrodnik. I'm an attorney at Savo, Schalk, Corsini, Warner, Gillespie, Ogrodnik, and Fisher out of Somerville, New Jersey, here on this application, second night for Homestead Road LLC, application 21-PB-25-MS-MSP. This is an application that seeks preliminary and finer major site plan approval and major subdivision approvals necessary to demolish the existing buildings, to construct two warehouses consisting of 368,995 square feet and 168,304,000 square feet on Homestead Road. As we went through the site plan last hearing, we talked about our on-site parking, landscaping, lighting, utilities, stormwater management. This is a property that's located in the TECD zone. The subject site of this application consists of two parcels identified as Lot 32 and Lot 33 in Block 200.10 here in Hillsborough. It's located north Homestead Road. The lot area consists of 88.45 acres. The site contains existing buildings near the east side of the property, the majority of the remaining property consisting of vacant and undeveloped land. Property is bordered on the north and the south by agricultural properties, on the east by residential properties, on the west by the 206 bypass and CSX Railroad. Lot 32, which is currently 68 acres, is vacant and formerly housed a hog farm. Lot 33 is 20.38 acres and contains an assortment of agricultural, commercial, residential buildings. For the subdivision, the applicant is proposing to move the existing lot line separating lots 32 and lot 33, resulting in a lot size modification. Lot 32, where it would go from 68.06 acres to 39.34 acres, and lot 33 would go from 20.38 acres to 49.10 acres. For the major site plan on lot 32, which is the western lot, again, we're proposing the 168,304 square foot warehouse at the rear of the property, approximately 840 feet off of Homestead Road. and the warehouse would have 2 access points off of Homestead. For lot 33, which is the eastern lot, applicant again is proposing 368,995-foot square house with internal office space, parking, and loading operations at the rear of the building. Again, that building would also have 2 access points off of Homestead Road. As noted in your board's planner report, warehousing, shipping, and receiving are listed as permitted principal uses in the TECO zone. The small office areas would be considered accessory uses to the warehousing operation. The TECD zone was a zone that was enacted in 2011 under Ordinance 2011-08. And it consists of 15 pages of bulk standards, design standards, different types of setbacks, and what is required to construct and develop the regulations in this district. I encourage the public to read the ordinance 2011-08. At the end of it, it talks about why the board enacted this ordinance. Essentially, it was a discussion about continuing a more industrial zone and having a more traditional zone. At the end of the day, the ordinance provides a transitional economic development district to provide transitional employment generating development between the high intensity light industrial and the corporate development districts in the existing nearby residential developments. Again, under subsection B, the principal permitted uses, specifically warehousing, shipping, and receiving, located completely within an enclosed building, is a permitted use. As I indicated, and for the benefit of the public, we submitted a fiscal impact statement.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'm trying not to interrupt Mr. Ogrodnik's dissertation, but this sounds more either like to be a introduction to an application or the conclusion of an application. There's a witness still pending and there's a subdivision issue. Plus, I think the record should reflect the fact that we have 2 objectors now who should be noted who should come up and note themselves for the record as well.
Okay.
So start.
Would you just at a high level go over the role of the objectors?
Why don't we have the 2 objectors note themselves for the record, and I will note the
Okay.
record.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Mike Pissarro. I'm the Policy Director and Attorney for the Watershed Institute. They're located at 31 Titus Mill Road in Pennington, New Jersey.
The other objector here?
Yep.
My name is Scott Gross. I live at 8 White Meadow Road in Hillsborough. Do you seek any context behind the objection tonight?
Just the name of the objector for the purpose of the record. The name of the entity that's objecting for the purpose of the record, Mr.
I represent a membership committee of residents. We're calling ourselves local citizens against traffic.
You have
or
to
LCAT.
talk up into the mic.
I'm speaking on behalf of a committee of Hillsborough residents who are concerned about negative impacts, particularly around truck traffic. We call ourselves local citizens against traffic, or LCAT.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, for purposes of the record, for those members of the public who have not been present for these types of application, objector is an individual or a group of individuals or an entity who represent a party in ostensibly objecting in some form or another to the application. They take a different status from individual members of the public. They come before the board to cross-examine witnesses prior to public questioning. They have the right to submit and present testimony on behalf of their parties and the right to have their witnesses cross-examine, produce reports and the like in a status different from an individual member of the public. That doesn't prevent the public from producing or presenting items to the board, but it is in a slightly different status and they take on an ability to object to testimony and or to take on other avenues that the individual members of the public would not necessarily do. For purposes of the record, Mr. Ogrodnik, and for the public, my recollection is that at the conclusion of the May 12th meeting, Mr. Ford, your engineer, was being cross-examined by members of the public. I assume he's here this evening?
He is.
It is also my understanding, Mr. Chairman, that at approximately 4:56 this afternoon, my office received an email from Mr. Ogrodnik with a legal opinion that I will tell the board I have not had a chance to review. Mr. Ogrodnik is well aware, having been at other applications where this has come up, that submission of opinions or reports and the like is usually required at least 7 to 10 days in advance of a hearing, so that my office can review them, Mr. DeSessa can review them, Mr. Maskey can review them, the board can. Objectors have the right to review, and the public through the civic clerk situation. None of that has occurred this evening. It is my understanding that some of you may have been, I don't know if Mr. Ogrodnik has passed out the copies for the board, but I believe it relates to the issue of the subdivision, which was raised back in May. I will indicate to the board that irrespective of Mr. Ogrodnik's opinion, I haven't formed an opinion based on A, his, and B, whatever else is or is not before the board at this point for the purpose of determining whether or not the subdivision can be approved or disapproved. And based on that, I would like the opportunity to review council's comments, possibly others as well, before I give advice to my client on where we are on the subdivision issue. So we're ostensibly left, from my perception, in one of two possible situations. One, you can bring Mr. Ford back for continuing cross-examination of his testimony from the May 12th meeting, and we can continue the application until I give the client advice prior to the next meeting that you would be at, for the issue of whether or not you have whatever your issue is relative to the subdivision. I don't know what it is, Michael. Or we can continue this hearing this evening at its present course until such time as I have had an opportunity, as well as the objectors, among others, and the board, to review your opinion letter and address it accordingly and go forward from there. Your call.
Well, I did send a couple of emails to you many weeks ago regarding this issue that I don't think is an issue in any way, and I believe Mr. Maskey didn't identify this as an issue. This is these two properties are under contract.
But the board has addressed as an issue, and the public has. It's up to you as to whether you want to address the issue. You've chosen now to address it. You've chosen apparently to provide my office with an opinion letter as to the propriety or impropriety of the subdivision. So, and the fact that you sent me a couple of emails and I didn't respond for whatever reason doesn't lead us to a 4:56 p.m. email today.
What's the issue?
The issue is I have no idea what it says, and until I've had a chance to look at it and do some research and advise my client, I don't think the client, nor has anyone seen it other than you, I don't think if anybody has had the opportunity to make comments regarding such. And therefore, I think it's a fundamental question that was related back in the May meeting as well, is whether or not we've got the cart before the horse, which is before we get to the underlying application, we have the issue of the subdivision. And I'm not going to get into the issue of how many owners create a subdivision or not. That's not the issue. The issue is whether or not the applicant, who apparently has the approval of the current property owners, qualifies for the subdivision, and if so, if it qualifies, what the board wants to hear before the board makes a decision whether to grant it or deny it. And I think that's the fundamental underlying question before we get to the issue of going forward with any further testimony beyond Mr. Ford's.
would you like to have some time to review the MLUL with respect to this issue? Because I don't understand how we can't proceed because we're contract purchasers. Obviously, if
I didn't say you couldn't proceed. I'm telling you that the subdivision issue, which I think is a fundamental issue that has to be addressed before we get to whether or not your clients are entitled to the application they're seeking, because the current property as configured doesn't permit the application. And I have every intention of reviewing the MLUL, but not at 8:05 at night in the middle of a board meeting. Any more than anyone else would expect anybody else, your office or anybody else, to do the same thing if I turned over an opinion letter and said, Michael, I think you should go forward on this based on my opinion, and here it is.
Well, again, you know,
And you've been here at enough meetings where you've articulated your client's position when others have tried to do the same.
Well, I believe that Mr. Maskey opined that this is routine, that obviously you can apply for site plan and subdivision approval at the same time.
No one said you couldn't. The issue is whether or not the board has to take an action on the subdivision before the board hears the application.
I would just cite to the ordinance that I cited in my letter that says the site can be simultaneous with a review of subdivision approval without the developer being required to make further application. It can be done, and it's entitled, it's 18826 entitled.
The developer isn't being asked at this time, Mr. Ogrodnik, to submit separate applications. The issue is whether or not your client's entitled to, and the board is going to approve or deny its subdivision request, because without the subdivision request, your application can't go forward in its current configuration, unless I missed something here.
I don't dispute that the board should certainly vote on the subdivision.
Right. And
That
the board
should precede the vote on the site plan,
Right.
but it's fully conforming subdivision with no variances. So it's as of right. We don't need any relief for the subdivision.
Whether or not you're entitled doesn't mean whether or not you're entitled to relief.
Well, I would suggest then we continue to move the ball down the field, and that issue can be preserved for appeal. It can be discussed or contemplated by your office. But I would agree with you that the subdivision should vote, and that vote could be tonight because it's fully conforming and it's as of right. And our site plan engineer testified that we meet all the requirements in the TECD zone. My legal memorandum, which I reiterated in multiple emails weeks ago, says that it's an as of right application. We don't need any relief. And I would agree with your prior statement that it should, again, should certainly go in an order. But I don't think there's any jurisdictional questions that have been legitimately raised, nor has anybody from the public or from objectors, et cetera, raised any legal argument that we can't move forward with a subdivision at the same time as a site plan, which is specifically contemplated in the Hillsborough ordinance. And Mr. Maskey didn't raise that issue in his professional review memorandum. And we do this all the time. We just did it for Green Village. We just did it for Brookhaven Lofts. We just did it for Amwell Terrace. We just did it for Avalon. We often move for a subdivision at the same time, or a lot line adjustment, which is, really what this is. You're just adjusting the lot line at the same time of major site plan.
Well, it's a little more than a lot line adjustment, Michael. Let's be realistic here. You're moving much more than a lot line. You're creating by the authorization of your clients to reconfigure the two lots they own into two different lots. It's much more than a lot line subdivision. That's my recommendation to the board. The board can choose to take the appropriate action. My recommendation, frankly, is, since we've got people here, to finish Mr. Ford's cross-examination by the public and/or by the objectors. And since we haven't had objectors until this evening, for everybody else to chime in relative to the issue of the subdivision, and the board will address it at a subsequent point, unless Mr. Ogrodnik isn't interested in waiving tonight's time of decision rule, then we'll address that at the appropriate time.
Swearing testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth? Nothing but the truth as tested before is working.
Yes.
Can you state the full name for the record, please?
Michael Ford, Ford.
Mr. Ford, when you were last here in May, we were at the point where you had concluded your direct testimony from Mr. Ogrodnik and were answering questions from the public. I believe is my recollection of that. And therefore, Mr. Chairman, if you want a motion to reopen to the public on Mr. Ford's testimony is the appropriate situation, starting if the objectors want to question him and/or reserve.
So the objectors would have first bite before
That is
we
correct.
open,
At this
so.
point, yes, again.
Okay, so I'm gonna,
Motion to open.
well, not yet, because the objectors can come up first. So if an objector would like to come up, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Mike Pissarro. Forgot to spell it. It's Pisauro.
Mr. Broussard, you're going to have to raise the mic and talk right into it because the people in the back of the room won't be able to hear you.
You got to talk into
We're
it.
very close to the mic.
It doesn't have long range.
Please interrupt me if I move away. Most of my questions are related to stormwater, and I do want to note that we did file our letter of notice that we were an objector last week, and I was not on that email or that letter that came out this afternoon. So
I will
courtesy.
indicate I gave Mr.
Yep.
Pizarro my copy.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Thank you. I have a lot of questions over your stormwater management plan, so I'll try to go as quickly as possible. The first basic question, is your stormwater management plan, the design that you have done, requiring any variances or waivers?
No.
So it is completely compliant with the township's ordinance and the New Jersey DEP's green infrastructure rule.
That's our intent, yes.
You have in your stormwater report on page 7, a notice, your language is drainage patterns under post-development conditions are very similar to the corresponding patterns under pre-development conditions. Therefore, the proposed development will not negatively impact any off-site or downstream properties. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you, according to NJAC 7:8 take a look at the hydrologic and hydraulic analysis to show that there is no increase as compared to the pre-construction conditions in the peak runoff rates or an increase in volume so as to cause impacts downstream or on-site?
That section of the state code you're referring to, we complied with the quantity reduction requirements, not the volume reduction requirements.
And when you say quantity, what you're really talking about is a peak rate reduction.
Correct.
All right. So as you increase impervious cover, you're going to increase the volume that comes off the site. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So did you do any analysis to show what that increased volume will do downstream?
That's not required by the code.
Okay. As a PE, I'm going to paraphrase, you have an ethical duty to make sure you're not having detrimental impacts to the community in your designs. Is that adequate paraphrase of your
Well, and
obligation?
to comply with the regulations.
Are you familiar with a Cornell study that the New Jersey DEP released in November that reflects that our current storm that we're currently experiencing for the 2, 10, and 100-year storm is actually about an inch higher than what the regulations are calling them at?
Excuse me, if you're referring to, there was about a month ago, and that was subsequent to the last hearing, some indication that the state was about to enact an emergency order regarding stormwater management, and then that didn't move forward. One of the aspects of that was a reference to the rainfall data. And I looked at that and our office is already preparing to implement that rainfall data on projects, and we fully expect the regulations will change to require that.
So the study I was actually referring to, which is the basis of those emergency rules, was released in November by the department. It was a study done by Cornell. But your designs don't incorporate that increased volume, that increased rainfall.
The rainfall data, no, they follow the current standard.
Okay. Which is, sure. So that the regulatory numbers you use are about an inch lower than what we're currently experiencing.
I'm not, I say fully agreement with what you're, I understand that the standards that the state was considering adopting were significantly even higher than that.
And your designs don't take into consideration the new numbers.
Well, the new numbers aren't new numbers yet. Yeah.
All right.
And it should be noted that the new numbers, if the new numbers were implemented, it would be new numbers for both the pre-developed condition analysis as well as the post-developed condition analysis. Therefore, the allowable release rates would be based on the pre-developed condition. So that would go up as well.
And all the piping in your system is designed based upon a 25-year system, 25-year storm.
The standard for the collection system, yes.
And if the 25-year storm is being underrepresented, what happens to that additional volume?
It would be it's not volume, it's the rate or the flow rate, the CFS, cubic feet per second.
And what happens to that? Is it able to go through the pipe? Does it go over land? Does it overwhelm the system? What happens?
It would really depends on the situation, but it would likely surcharge the system. So it just well, better. Okay. It would surcharge the system and flow along the gutters, curbs. Normally that's the way. Yeah.
It wouldn't go through the pipes.
Well, it depends on just how much bigger it gets. The 25-year storm you're designing for, often we get rainfall events greater than that, and there's not a surcharge of pipe flow.
Now, I want to start referencing some of the specific drainage areas on your plans. So for the drainage area 1, for the rain garden 1, what is the overall drainage area of that system?
Don't have that number.
Do you have that on one of your plans?
Would be in the drainage report. I don't have that with me this evening.
Okay. My reading of it, it was over 20, almost 21 acres, 20.66 acres. Does that sound about right?
I just answered your question, yeah, about the number.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a ton of questions regarding the drainage area calculations and the size of those basins. And you don't have your stormwater report with you?
Do you have a report?
I do.
This is December. We need that. Yeah. Let me check my, okay. Check.
Mr. Pizarro, can you tell us which report exactly you're referencing so we could?
The April, here, I have it, excuse me, sorry. April 4th.
And actually, one of the things I'm looking at is the proposed drainage area map. I believe it's page 505 of the drainage area maps. Yep. Soil log exhibit.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Page 4. If that is yes, here. So area 1 has a drainage area of 20.66 acres.
Yes.
And how much of that is a regulated motor vehicle surface?
The total impervious coverage in that is 15.5 acres, which includes the building.
And you don't have that broken out from motor vehicle to impervious to,
Not on this sheet, and
and all of that goes to that rain garden and
the basin at the back.
Are you familiar, well, you testified that you're familiar with the NJDEP stormwater regs.
Yes.
The regulations require a rain garden to be no more than 2.5 acres per drainage area.
That's with regards to water quality. Water quantity does not have a maximum, and you're referring to the basin at the back of the site of Building 1, which is for water quantity. Quality measures are treated with individual small areas. In this case, we've utilized or proposed porous pavement, infiltration or infiltrators or green infrastructure, mechanical treatment devices. It depends on the area.
Okay. So you have, is it 2 porous pavement areas for warehouse 1?
It's, yes, in the front and in the back, yes.
And what is the contributory drainage area for each of those porous pavement areas?
Okay. On pervious pavement drainage area map, which is one of the sheets in the back of the report, in the front, we have PP7 is 0.91 acres, PP1 is 1.58 acres, and P3 is 3.88 acres. And what it, for porous pavement areas with regards to the 2.5 acre limit, doesn't apply to the porous pavement areas. It's, the porous pavement area has to be a certain percentage of the motor vehicle surface that runs to it.
Do you know how much of the contributory acreage or percentage is for each of those? So it's a 3-to-1 ratio.
Correct. Right.
Do you know what those each one ratio is?
Well, it's yes, no, I don't know the exact for each one of those, but that's what we've designed it for that, yes.
But is that somewhere in your report that we could look at and confirm?
I don't know that it is. I don't know.
All right. And
just visually, it is.
Now for, is it PP7 and PP1? Those are the 2 porous pavement areas in the front?
Correct.
Do you have any maps or other documents that show where the soil pits or the soil bores are?
We have a soil report or a soil exhibit that was shown at the back of this map, and we've submitted a supplemental report. And we've also been requested by the township engineer in his review memorandum to provide additional supplemental geotech work that we've agreed to at the last hearing. So any and all soil testing that's required or believed to be in dispute or is an issue, or we want supplemental testing to confirm it, we've already agreed to do that.
And will that occur before the next hearing, before an approval?
Normally, we address all the comments by the board engineer as a condition of approval. And if we can't, we don't satisfy the approval.
Do you know what the infiltration rate for the PP7 is?
Don't have that answer, sir.
Okay. But is it's somewhere in your report?
The supplemental report or the geotech report, yes.
And was
And
that,
I would defer to our geotechnical department for their expertise in answering that. So we're glad to provide that.
okay. Was that provided to the public before now?
We provided all the testing we've done. We've been asked to look at supplemental testing, and we've agreed to do it.
And do you know what the depth of the seasonal high water table is?
That's also in the geotechnical report. All the geotechnical questions, sir, I'm not a geotechnical expert. I would defer to our geotechnical, so I can provide any and all data that is necessary.
But that information is important because you cannot have a basin that intercepts the seasonal high water table, or if you're doing infiltration, it has to have a 2-foot separation.
Correct. Well, it depends on the BMP that you're proposing.
Did you have that?
And in this case, let me just, should the porous pavement, which is for water quality, be in dispute, an alternative that's straightforward and simple, and we've already implemented at other sites or locations on the site, would be to use the infiltrator or other type of GI mechanical treatment device. Basically a treatment device in advance of the catch basin before the motor vehicle surface gets to it.
Okay. But having the geotechnical done, having the infiltration rates is important in the design of the porous pavement. It's important for the design of the rain garden.
Agreed. And
All right. For drainage area 2B. Maybe these questions are going to be sort of repetitive, and I apologize, but that's again about 2.84 acres. And is all of that going for water quality treatment?
Yes. And what should be noted is the 2.5 acre limit doesn't include the basin itself.
And does your drainage area calculations include the basin?
The area we just described, which is the 2.8 acres, includes the basin.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you were to subtract the basin, how big would it be?
Less than 2.5.
Is that calculation somewhere in your report?
Sure, the math is because we have all the areas of all the basins, so it could be, the data's there.
And if I ask the same question for 2C, it's 2.62 acres. And you included the size of the basin itself in that?
2C.
You know what? Take that back.
Yeah.
2C, you're bypassing.
Right, the 2C is not to a basin. 2C is the easterly driveway.
And that is 0.18 of a motor vehicle traveled surface.
The impervious outlined under 2C is 0.18, yes.
And that's not receiving any water quality treatment.
That's going to the road, that's correct.
Okay. But the overall project here obviously is a major development, and all
That's
the
correct.
impervious surface needs water quality treatment.
That's correct.
All right. Drainage 2A in that rain garden. That's over 12 acres.
Correct.
And that includes, obviously, I think if the same thing is consistent, the footprint of the rain garden or the infiltration basin.
Yes,
And over 7.61 acres of impervious, is that draining into that system for water quality treatment?
no, that basin 2A is for quantity control. the water quality measures for the motor vehicle surfaces in that area are with the porous pavement and/or could be addressed with GI mechanical treatment devices
The Filterra
or other.
or other.
Correct.
There's probably 2 or 3 systems approved by DEP.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that decision would be based upon what the additional soil testing and infiltration
Correct.
did,
Correct.
which we haven't done yet.
Well, we were asked to do it at the last hearing and we haven't, that was one of the comments in the engineer's review. No.
All right. And again, somewhere in there, to the extent there were basins tested in there, I would know where the seasonal high water table mark is.
Correct. And we've agreed to comply in each and every regard with those comments the board engineer included in his report.
But as you sit here today, do we know if there were any test pits in that basin?
Basin 2A?
Yes.
We have a soil log exhibit, the last page in the drainage report. So there was soil testing done there.
And do you know, as you sit here today, where the seasonal high water table mark is?
And it's below, 2 feet below the bottom of the basin.
And you're testifying it because you remember that, or you're testifying to that because that's how you designed the system and you're assuming it's below it?
Not assuming it's soil log 4 on the exhibit I just referenced has a seasonal high water table at 67.23 acres or 2.3 in the bottom of that basin is more than 2 feet above that.
So in that soil log, you would have all of the test pits, 1 through 35. I think that's probably the highest I see. So if I was to represent that, at least on the online copy, 30 is the highest test pit.
You mean the total number of tests?
Yes.
You're talking about?
Well, I see, I'm just looking right now, you have soil log 35. And
I think, there would be test pits that may have been done and not recorded and provided as data because they weren't referenced for design. So I don't know what the total number of exploratory tests would be out there, but you're referring to numbers on a plan and that's what we provided.
so if your plan shows a soil log number 35, the document that has been provided to the township should have a soil log number 35.
Correct. Well, it's, the data is actually outlined on this exhibit to reference and make it easy for review with the pertinent data.
You would agree with me that DEP has very specific requirements of what's in the soil log?
The criteria for doing the soil log by the geotech expert, yes.
Yeah. And what's on that plan doesn't encompass everything that is required for a soil log.
It's not the full logging of each and every horizon, no, not on this plan.
But that would be in your soil report.
Either the geotechnical report we've already provided, yes.
All right. All right, I'm going to ask, if I may, the one we've been looking at, which is the soil logging exhibit or any other report made. So you have 2 roadways that lead to the warehouse 2. Can you tell me what the area for those 2 roadways are?
Mr. Chairman, I just interrupt procedurally. Could you identify exactly what you're looking at?
Sure. That was the drainage maps and that was the soil.
Here,
Can you tell us what the cover page says and what the date was?
yeah, it's this, can I just, those are the plans that are in the rear of the drainage report. It's Appendix I of the report, which references the drainage area maps and soil exhibit. We are looking at the last revised April 4th, 2022.
Prepared by your company.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, I apologize. So I guess the question was, those two roads, what was the total?
Yeah, I think we referenced that earlier when we were referring to drainage area 2B. It includes those two roads that go to that basin on the south side of that building.
And does anything else go to that basin?
Not according to this drainage map I'm looking at, no.
And then looking at that same document.
Well, the basin itself drains to it too, of course.
I'm sorry?
The basin itself, we talked about that earlier, that 2.8 acres.
So that drainage area includes the area of the
basin, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, is it a rain garden to the north of Warehouse 1? Is that a rain garden?
I'll refer to them by numbers. 2A is an infiltration basin. 2B is a bioretention system with an underdrain.
Why did you design it with an underdrain?
Because we are dealing with it as water quality and not counting on it for infiltration. That doesn't mean that it doesn't permit infiltration, but, and you're referring to it as a rain garden. I know that is small scale for like a single family house, but on terms of the BEP manual, I would refer to it as a bioretention.
Small scale bioretention.
Well, these are larger scale, homeowners might refer to it as a rain garden.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Does the berm of that northern basin or bioretention system, is that in the township stream corridor?
No.
So no part of that basin, berm, or other part of that structure is in the township's stream corridor?
The discharge pipe of the basin extends into the stream corridor in order to extend down to the stream. Here, I can show you here. Here's the stream corridor.
I'm sorry, we're referring to two different bioretention. So for Warehouse 1, which is on the easterly side of the site, and there's a giant deal.
Yeah, that's basin, we can refer to it as basin 1.
Basin 1.
The other two are basins 2A and 2B.
All right. Does that basin, does any part of the berm or structure of that basin enter into the township stream corridor?
No, no.
So it's all outside of it?
That's the intent, yes.
Okay. And if it were to encroach, you would move it out?
Correct.
All right. And I think my last question, I appreciate yeah. Are you using as part of your calculations a weighted average curve number for any of the drainage areas?
For the CN?
Yes.
No, we're separating out the impervious coverage and the open space to, so the hydrographs are run separately.
Are you combining different kinds of impervious surfaces in your curve number? So porous pavement and regular pavement, are you averaging those?
We're not considering the porous pavement with a smaller CN number, as I recall. It was the same CN number as if it were standard pavement.
So you would be using 98 for each?
Correct, right.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate this board's.
That's conservative too.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Here.
Scott Gross, 8 White Meadow Road. I applied as for status as an objector, but actually I don't have anything about that tonight. That's really about traffic concerns. maybe at the next meeting. But I would like to kick off the public comment and cross-examination. So the project proposes to increase impervious surface area by over 900,000 square feet, as per Van Cleef's proposed drainage map and the drainage report dated on April 4th this year. According to the Pannoni and Associates review letter dated May 6th this year, this will also increase the peak runoff rates. And I'll note there are also several comments from Pannoni that still need to be addressed by Van Cleef. While the Van Cleef report states that the proposed development will not negatively impact any off-site or downstream properties, what guarantees will you provide that downstream residents of the facility will not have exacerbated flooding?
The standards require peak flow reductions for the 210 and 100-year storm, and we've complied with that. There's not a requirement to study the stream downstream or at any point downstream. It's controlled on site, and that's what we've complied with. And by a pretty good margin, where the peak flow permitted for the 2-year storm is 13 CFS. Our analysis shows it's at 5 CFS, less than half what the allowable would be. For the 10-year storm, we're at 44, or the allowable is 44 CFS. We're at 17, so substantially below what would be permitted to be discharged in a peak flow from the 10-year storm. And then, I'm sorry, for the 10-year storm. And then for the 100-year storm, basically allowable is rounding 100 CFS, and we're at 80. And that 100 CFS is based on the standards set for us by the regulatory agency, DEP, to reduce the peak flow from the site in the existing condition by 80%. So the existing condition flow from the site is 125 CFS for the 100-year storm. The reduction requirement by the DEP says that you're allowed to discharge 100 CFS, and we're at 80 CFS.
So there's no guarantee that this won't exacerbate flooding then?
Well, that's probably a better question for DEP, because when they set these standards for developed conditions, they set it in a sense that they're working toward addressing drainage overall regionally. That's their purview. And I'm well aware of drainage issues with older developments, but the standards keep becoming more and more stringent. In fact, we heard earlier this evening about, and I acknowledge that DEP is looking at maybe even making the standards even more stringent in order to ensure or to regulate proposed developments such that they don't cause adverse drainage impacts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
To the board, our area has seen unprecedented flooding, especially after Hurricane Ida, and in particular that area and that downstream area. Me and my neighbors have seen flooding that we've never seen before. This project provides the potential for further imbalance in stormwater in that area. We're seeing it right now where that area can't handle it. And you're putting an undue risk on the public, local residents and downstream residents by approving this project.
Rich Garman, Winding Way. I want to go back to the very beginning, and maybe you can just clarify if it's a formality or what, but the application shows both of these parcels as vacant land, yet one of them has residents on it and 4 businesses. Why are they being presented as vacant land?
The plans show the existing conditions. I'm not sure what you're referring to as vacant land.
The application or in your application from the homeowners, it's listed as vacant land in both of them.
Well, one of the lots is agricultural, so
Right.
normally you would refer to that as vacant, and the other lot has an existing residence and commercial operation. We've acknowledged
Right,
that.
but why wouldn't it say existing residential area?
I don't know what aspect of the application you're referring to, but we fully acknowledged and represent on the plans what the existing conditions are.
Okay, I was just curious why it was listed that way, and if you look through what you posted, you'll see it. Sorry, I don't have it for you to reference. Could you clarify the actual number of parking, both loading docks, car parking, trailer parking, and drive-ins on each warehouse? Because on page 3 and 4 of the most recent site plan, page 3 shows 191 parking spots, page 4 shows 188. I mean, it's minor, but you'd think these things would be
Right.
exact.
The report we received from the township referencing the plans for the Westerly warehouse, or the warehouse on lot 32 has 96 parking spaces. On lot 33, it's 188 parking spaces. And then on your other question, sir?
Well, I just wanted to make sure my numbers were correct.
Okay, yeah.
All right. And the bigger warehouse has 2 drive-in bays, and the smaller one has 1 drive-in bay, right?
That's a good question for the architect.
Okay, that's what it's showing.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm mentioning that is because Mr. Brodnick specifies specifically in the zoning ordinance, it says that warehousing, packaging, shipping and receiving is an acceptable thing. What he left out is in a completely enclosed warehouse. I take that to mean the only bays you can use are 2 drive-in to load trucks, okay? These guys in the March 2011 zoning thing emphasized how much time they spent to make sure these things were correct.
Yeah.
They completely enclosed means they were intending that you're going to pull in trucks, close the doors, do all of your shipping and receiving, open the doors, and those 2 trucks are going to leave.
Form speculative.
Yeah.
That's what the ordinance says. Shipping and receiving,
expert planner.
completely enclosed building. I just want to point it out, that's what it says.
That's the intent.
Okay,
That's
and
all
if-
of the code.
Okay, so only 2 trucks can be
No,
loaded at
that's
a
not what
time.
that means.
That's how I read it. The retention basins, we're not water experts. Could you explain the difference between a bio retention basin and just a regular retention basin and the Filterra, I think?
Sure. First, the regular detention basin you might be referring to is something that you've seen in the past with manicured lawn and a concrete low flow channel down the middle of it. The changes in the regulations have basically made those obsolete. All the higher level new regulatory requirements require different types of basins. The bioretention is a basin that has like a planting bottom, so it might be different types of landscape materials. So it's not a basin that's mowed every day. It's got landscaping to promote the absorption of the water, if you will, and the water quality, enhance the water quality. The Infilterra, that refers to a specific type of device by a supplier, if you will. You're familiar with catch basins along the side of a road where water flows into it. Well, now with the newer stormwater regulations, there's devices that get placed in advance of that catch basin that capture the water quality storm to help treat the water surface coming off of that, what we call the motor vehicle surface. So it's a water quality measure. It's like I'll say a large catch basin with planting mix in it. So again, it's similar to the bioretention.
Okay. The infiltration basins, similar to like septic system, it's going to bleed through eventually into the water,
The
groundwater.
all these, could allow stormwater to run through them and into the ground. Yes. Well, not the devices I described in front of a catch basin are self-contained.
Okay.
Yeah.
What could be possible impact on well water in that area? Because a lot of the residents have well water.
Yeah, the water quality, one of the aspects of stormwater management is water quality treatment, and these devices are intended to provide that treatment where 10, 15 years ago, the regular detention basin didn't consider that.
Okay. You mentioned that one of the outflow pipes is going to extend into the stream.
The question was regards to the Hillsborough Township stream corridor.
Right, but it's
so-
going to drain, there is a pipe that's going to drain
Correct,
into
yes.
Royceboro.
Yeah, actually, yeah,
Okay,
all the
so-
basins have to have one of our regulatory agencies that we have to gain approval from is the Soil Erosion and Sediment Control District, Somerset Union Soil Conservation District. They deal with the stability of the discharge points. So those basins have a discharge pipe that leads to a stream where there's a device to manage and prevent erosion.
Gotcha. But in the event of like Ida, those pipes get overcovered by the stream, correct? Could possibly
They
get overcovered.
could, yes, they
Right.
could, yeah.
At that point, there's going to be no outflow.
Hydraulically, not necessarily, no. They could have a tailwater, if you will. That's what, is often
What I'm
referred
getting at
to.
is if it can't outflow the water, how long are those basins going to hold it until they overflow? If you have an extended 3-4 day rain and it can't release it, are they going to overflow?
Well, part of the analysis is the hydraulic analysis and the adequacy of that discharge pipe. And we provided that in the stormwater management.
Okay, my
report.
concern is it rains for a week straight and the basins can't hold any more water. The pipe isn't going to release it. That water is going to go over the sides and down that hill and exacerbate flooding.
Now, our analysis takes into consideration the rainfall data that's dictated to us by NJDEP for the 100-year storm, which would be the most severe storm we're designing for now. And that includes, the hydraulic capacity of the basin and how it functions during that rainstorm.
Okay, but things fail and the best research in the world, we get flooded and then we're up to grade.
Well, even the basins themselves, every basin has an emergency spillway. So if there was a clog of an outlet structure, the discharge from the basin is in a controlled manner.
Okay. Bear with me a second. The pervious asphalt underneath the parking, how is that maintained? I mean, you're designing this to be, a certain spec, right? And we're going to have 500 plus vehicles, who knows how many trips, because you don't know the tenant yet. They're going to be carrying grime, and let's just say they're going to store sawdust there. We don't know. And they spill that with oil and everything. Is it going to clog that stuff, and then they're less effective?
Right, and part of the compliance with the regulations is that we provide an operation and maintenance manual. And again, with regular basins, 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't necessarily a requirement. Now it is. That operation and maintenance manual includes how the owner is to maintain all these stormwater management facilities. And the township now requires those operation and maintenance manuals to be recorded with the deed for the property. So if this owner were to sell the property, the title search, that is anything of record at the county clerk's office, like the deed or any easements, would also include a discovery of the operation and maintenance manual. So there's safeguards in place to ensure that the owner knows what his responsibilities are. And then the township also has an ordinance that requires annual inspections of these basins to be provided to the engineering department. So there's safeguards in place that weren't in place 20 years ago to ensure that maintenance. And that would include, addressing not only, over time, but even an event like you just described.
Okay, another question on the basins. Do they have a life? Like a septic field gets saturated after so many years of use, and you got to relocate it.
Yeah.
Does the same thing occur with these basins?
I'm not sure that DEP dictates a lifespan, but part of that operation and maintenance manual is to address all the elements of the basin so that it continues to operate.
I don't know if we can cover this, but I'll throw it up and they can tell me no. I noticed you added a line of sight plan to the documents. Okay? Can I ask about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you showed a line of sight across my house and my neighbor's house, and it shows like the existing trees would line up with the top of your structure. Okay? And that's great in a drawing or everything, but you're welcome to come to my house. I can see from that residence right now the lights at his house, and he's substantially further than this building's going to be. So my concern is, even though you're going to have 15-foot lights and your drawings show it nice and it lines up, that's not reality.
Well, I think we said at the last hearing, and said again, is that we didn't request relief for the mounting height of the poles for the lights. We kept them at 15 feet, although, typically, you might go higher to reduce the amount of structures and provide more efficient lighting with that type of issue in mind. And then we provided landscaping, including the landscaping along the easterly portion of the property toward your house. And that includes even pulling existing disturbance close to that tree line further back. And to the extent we can or requested by the board's engineer to provide additional landscaping in that area to provide a effective landscape buffer in accordance with the ordinance, we agreed to comply with that.
Let me just check. I got anything else. Oh, you mentioned revenue numbers in the beginning of the project, what the town's going to reap, what the school board's going to reap. Have those numbers been adjusted now to reflect the fact that you've removed, the office building, the third building that was originally proposed, the removal of everything else?
It's not a question for me. Yeah, I didn't, you might be referring to the fiscal impact statement.
Fiscal impact,
that
right.
wouldn't have been done by myself. That's
Okay.
somebody else. So I don't know the answer to that.
So he's going to testify, so we have those, because the newspapers are quoting those numbers, and if they haven't been adjusted, they're quoting, wrong information. Okay, thank you.
Bill Martin, 237 Hillsborough Road. At the last meeting, Mr. Ford, you discussed the driveways were being widened for emergency vehicles.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. You discussed that the driveways were being widened for access for emergency vehicles.
Right, the driveways on either side of the building, we're proposing at 30 feet as opposed to the 24,
Okay.
and requesting a design waiver.
All right. If an 18-wheeler tractor trailer was coming from either direction, would it be able to make that turn into the driveways without them being widened?
We've shown turning templates, and with regards to truck maneuverability and circulation, I would defer to our traffic and engineer that we're open to provide testimony this evening.
Okay. Do these driveways encircle the warehouse?
We have a driveway around the entire warehouse on the easterly lot and around every portion of the westerly building except for the north end. There's an emergency access lane around the north end.
Okay, but a truck could enter one side, go around the back and leave the other?
For perhaps circulation can be addressed by the traffic engineer.
Okay, I'll have to hold off for then.
Good evening. Brian Tarantino, 235 Fairfield Lane. Is this close enough? You guys here? Okay. On the previous question around the line of sight, my view of that document, I don't know the number, sorry, it required 40-foot trees in order to block the line of sight. So was at an elevation where the top of the tree had to be at 40 feet. So are those deciduous trees or are those evergreens?
We have a mixture of plantings that we're proposing, and my review of the site is there's a mixture of trees in the existing woods too. So it's a
And
mixture.
so you're going to be
It's
putting
not-
in, so your landscaping is going to be putting in 40-foot trees?
No, that doesn't show the proposed trees that high. But eventually they would grow that high. Yeah.
Sure. Eventually, yeah, that's good. But right away, the line of sight, the neighbors right there would be this warehouse building would be directly in their line of sight. Especially in the winter when the deciduous trees, drop their leaves.
Are you talking about the line of sight to the north? That's 1,000 feet away. It's quite a distance to the building.
It's a big building.
Right. Oh. Right.
So you're saying that while you provided an analysis of the line of sight and are relying on 40-foot trees to block the view.
That shows some of the existing trees too on our site that we're not disturbing. There's already an existing.
So it's all full of 40-foot trees is what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that. Sir.
Okay.
I'm saying that our goal is to comply with the state or the township ordinance with regards to that required landscape buffer. First, the distance of that landscape buffer from the property line, we're beyond that. I described that at the last hearing, where the buffer or the setback for the landscape buffer along the residential zone properties is 100 feet. We're well in excess of that, more like 200 feet to any disturbance and even further for the building. And then within that area, we're providing for the landscaping in accordance with the town standard. And to the extent that there's additional plantings being requested of us, perhaps even trees that are required as part of our tree mitigation that can be better placed and utilized along the residences' properties, we would do that in compliance with whatever your board engineer requests. So,
Okay, so what you're saying is you would agree to moving some of the required trees closer to the residents so that they could better block the line of sight.
Right. We're looking to not just comply with the landscape requirement, but in those areas where there's a particular concern or perhaps even a line of sight of particular concern, we would do that, make those plantings affect in that area.
Okay, so the concern that was raised at the May 12th meeting was the ability for those neighbors to have this gigantic building in their back window, so they'd be able to see it. And the purpose of the analysis that you did wasn't to comply with the landscaping requirements of the TECD. It was to mitigate this concern that was raised by the planning board. And so your analysis showed that in order to mitigate that line of sight, you need trees that are 40 feet tall. And don't give up their leaves.
The landscape buffer, as I understand it, is for the parking. So the parking, it's likely you'd probably still see the building. You'd see the top of the building. But with regards to buffering the activity, that is the parking, the circulation, the truck traffic, the site lights that are 15 feet higher maximum, that landscaping is particularly geared toward addressing those elements.
Got it. But no mitigation for the residents to see this gigantic building in their back window.
Don't know how to, I just described the landscaping that we're endeavoring to do.
Right, which is supposed to be, the activity of the parking. So that's what I'm hearing is that you provided an analysis. It showed you need these 40-foot trees in order to block the view, and and that's obviously not. It looks like you're doing it, but in fact, it's not.
The top of the building, that's not my understanding what's required. I mean, that's logical,
No.
like you just described, that you.
Yeah, it's not addressed by the TECD for sure,
Right.
but it is obviously a concern. You guys are joining the neighborhood. It's obviously a concern for us as neighbors.
Right.
So what we're going to have to live with is this eyesore in our back windows.
Not the architect, I don't know about the eyesore issue. That's not an engineering issue.
Oh, is the architect coming?
He's here this evening, and we hope to have him testify. Yeah.
All right, great. So we could ask him about the line of
The
sight.
appearance of the building, what it looks like, what it's built of, what it's made of, correct. Right.
Okay, great. I have a few other questions. Do you have a planned or prospective buyer for the facility?
That's not a site engineering question, sir. I don't know the answer to it.
Okay. It speaks to the use of the building, and which is extremely relevant. I mean, you talked about how the suitability of the building. Last time you talked about the suitability of the building for that location, and it is very much a function of what kind of warehousing is going to be occurring in that location. And so that's why I'm asking, do you know what kind of warehousing activity is planned for the buildings?
That's not what I testified to with regard to use of the building, and as I just said, we'd have other witnesses this evening. Perhaps they can address your question.
Okay, so who would be addressing the use of the building? Because I have a lot of questions about that.
I don't know. Yeah,
Sorry?
not me.
Okay, so who would it be?
There's no tenant proposed. It's spec building.
Okay. So who would we ask questions to? Who's representing the applicant?
The proposed use would be consistent with the ordinance.
Okay, my question is, who's representing the applicant? So I can ask.
I'll help out on this because I know the attorney is not gonna. There'll be a time for us if and we get to that point about operational hours. We've had other applications where there haven't been tenants and we've set parameters around those in absence of so I'm sure we'll get to that discussion.
Okay.
Probably towards the end of the application, so.
I appreciate that. My concerns are more than just operating hours. I mean, obviously that's one of them. But, what are the materials that are going to be stored? Are there hazardous materials that are going to be allowed? Are there biological wastes that they're going to be allowed to store? Are there medical wastes that they would be allowed to store? Are there flammable materials that they'll be allowed to store? Are there radioactive or low-level radioactive materials would they be allowed to store? I have a pretty long list of those kinds of questions. So I appreciate, what you're saying. As long as there is an opportunity to ask the right person those questions and get a reasonable answer.
I can guarantee if we get to that point and we have to start talking about parameters of the operations, I'm sure the applicant will be at the microphone to answer those. Otherwise, we'll just start putting conditions on. And I'm sure the attorney will go to his applicant and ask him if he would comply with those, if we get to that point.
Okay, all right,
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
I do have a few more questions. What are the plans? So you may or may not recall that on February 11th in 2016, a huge fire broke out at a 240,000 square foot warehouse at the Veterans Industrial Park that burned for 3 straight days, involved 500,000 square feet of warehouse space, torched trailers parked nearby, needed 93 responding fire companies, 500 firefighters, more than 200 emergency vehicles, and caused $50 million in damage. Schools were closed due to the plume of acrid smoke, and Route 206 was shut down. Plastic pellets were one of the main products stored, as well as paper records. The fire reignited more than 6 times over the course of the following month and required multiple efforts from the fire department to control the burning rubble. In what ways does your facility design go beyond the bare minimum to prevent the reoccurrence of a catastrophic event like this?
I think we'd like to get the architect up here to answer all those questions.
So, about fire control.
Right, and the construction of the building.
Okay.
What a modern warehouse entails, yeah.
Okay, great. I'll hold that question as well. I do have a few other questions. You did testify with regard to the TECD and the appropriateness of the facility in meeting the TECD requirements.
I think the attorney described that in his introduction. I'm the site engineer. I'm designing the site improvements.
Okay.
Not specifically the use.
No, it's about the design of the facility.
Okay.
So I'm going to be talking about the TECD ordinance, which is 188-107 -.2. The TECD ordinance requires that the primary entrance of each building shall accommodate pedestrian access from the streets. Given that this is core to the stated intent of this TECD as a pedestrian and cycling friendly transition from the residential to the light industrial zone, how is not complying with this requirement, as you had said last time, still in keeping with the intent of the TECD?
Yeah, as I recall, the discussion at the last hearing was that we're not proposing that because we don't feel it's practical. Like, that's not what would happen at this location. But if the board were to feel that it's appropriate for us to provide that access out to Homestead Road, we would. So we would remove that request for relief. So we're deferring to the board.
Okay, so you're saying that
we provide sidewalks from the buildings out to Homestead Road. There's no sidewalks on Homestead Road.
Yes.
But we would provide sidewalks from the buildings out to Homestead Road with regards to that section of the code you just described.
Okay, so I believe they are saying they want that because it's in the ordinance. And this was a very carefully crafted ordinance that took many hours and many people to develop. This is what they're asking for. I'm surprised that you would wonder what they're actually asking for. So
I'm sorry, I didn't say I was wondering what they would do. We're talking about sidewalks from the building entrances along the driveways out to Homestead Road.
Mhm.
We're suggesting that since there's no other sidewalks along Homestead Road, and it doesn't seem like it would be a place where pedestrians would access the site from the road frontage, that we didn't show that on the plan. But if the board were to feel that that's something that should be done, we will.
as a resident, and all we have are the ordinance to kind of be the guide, I would strongly urge the planning board to require every part of the TECD requirements to be fully complied with, including this one. The notion of the TECD is that it is supposed to be a transition, that's the word, from the light industrial buildings to the residential zone. And so that's why it was so carefully crafted to reflect that.
Sir, along those lines, and I would have gotten it to my introduction, but the variances that were identified and were requested at the last hearing, we're going to defer to the board. We're going to present this application variance free. So there's also a variance for pedestrian pathways when there's over 50 parking spaces. Again, we felt since there was, if you recall testimony, there was only two parking areas that we didn't feel it was appropriate, but we're going to defer to the board, as well as the waivers. There's waivers for signage size, for directional signage where we're requesting design waivers. We're going to also defer to the board on that relief that we need. The one waiver, so we're going to present this application without any variances from the TECD zone. And for waivers, the one waiver we do feel is appropriate is the drive aisle width of 30 feet versus 24 feet. And if you recall, Mr. Ford's testimony related to safety and circulation concerns, but our traffic expert will opine on that. But I want to let the board know that we'll defer to the board and present the application without any variances and with only that one waiver, which we think is appropriate, the design waiver.
Excellent. So when should we expect the revised site plan to reflect all of the requirements of the TECD? Because you missed quite a number.
That would be added as part of compliance. That would be reviewed by Mr. DeSessa to add that sidewalk and to add, I guess, smaller scale pavement treatment, pavers or scoring, essentially crosswalks. So that's not something that we would generally redesign all the site plan for. But it's important that, along with your questions about the zone, that we're going to present this application variance free.
Okay, F3I says parking areas shall be designed to be interconnected with adjacent properties and shall utilize common entrances and exits where feasible to minimize access points to the street. Such interconnections shall be established through an appropriate cross-access easement. I don't see how you guys are complying with that. Or let me ask that as a question. How are you complying with that particular requirement? F3I.
The access driveways to Homestead Road are minimized. There's not an appropriate situation where there would be an interconnection between these two buildings. There's environmental constraints, stream corridors that would need to be crossed in order to provide the driveway between the two sites, if you will. That would be the only interconnection.
Okay, so
where appropriate.
Now, the where feasible is a modification of the first phrase, of the second phrase, with adjacent property, shall utilize common entrances and exits where feasible.
Yeah.
So the where feasible is not for the first one. It says parking areas shall be designed to be interconnected with adjacent properties. So you need a variance from that requirement because of, site conditions.
Well, there's not an appropriate spot to put that between these two sites.
So you need a variance from that requirement.
Going to defer and answer that.
I'm sorry?
I said I'm going to defer to the board professionals with regards to whether we comply or not comply, or whether there's a need to provide that access. One of the references you just described as an easement, we could provide an easement between the two properties for a driveway connection that would really not serve any utility. It would be an area where they could put a driveway between the two of them, but it would add an additional impervious cover for no good reason and would not be appropriate.
So you're saying that the requirements of the TECD were put in there for no good reason?
No, I'm saying that there are specific situations where it may or may not be appropriate. If there was a need to share the parking here, for example, there's not a need to share the parking.
How do you know that?
Because we provided adequate parking on both sites so that they stand alone.
But you don't know the use of the building, so how do you know you're not going to need to overflow parking?
Because the township standard has required number of parking spaces for the type of use, the generic use. And when you continue to talk about use, the board would always look at a situation, even if there were a specific user here already identified, that doesn't preclude the owners from selling the property sometime down the road to another use. So the ordinance is designed to address that dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why to say, well, we don't have that need now is not a very good answer, because that need could arise in the future. And that's why it's important to stick with the strict requirements of the TECD. But if you need a variance, then fine, you should put it in as a variance. Because the site, I understand the site conditions, there's wetlands, and it's a sensitive site. It's a site rich with wildlife, and putting more pavement is exactly what the site doesn't need. So I would say you need to apply for a variance. And we'd need to, and I think it would be appropriate for you to revise the site plan, not at some point in the future, but so that the public can see what that looks like, so that we can comment on it. Not just say, oh yeah, we'll do it at some point, and have it approved without us having a chance to comment on it. So that in general, the idea of revising the site plan to reflect all of the TECD requirements, we would like to see what that looks like before the board is asked to rule on it. Section F3L says there shall be a comprehensive network of sidewalks around the front, sides, and rear of the buildings. The sidewalks and passageways shall be linked to each other, off-site pedestrian connections where appropriate, based on proximity to existing residential areas, proposed intended use of the building, and provision of existing or planned pedestrian or bicycle improvements. In fact, the site plan shows no such comprehensive network of sidewalks. Why was this requirement overlooked?
We feel we've shown the sidewalks where they're appropriate. There's really no place for a sidewalk in the loading area at the back of each building, and the sidewalks are provided in the parking area to the entrances of the buildings.
So you need a variance from this requirement then?
That's not my interpretation, and it hasn't.
He's not a planner. He's not our professional planner. He's a civil engineer.
I don't know what that means. So he's testifying on behalf with regard to the facility. I'm talking about facility requirements. The ordinance places certain requirements on the design of the facility. I thought that's you.
You referenced relief or variances. A planner normally addresses that.
Okay. So is that planner here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Great. So hopefully he can hear that would be, it's not a variance-free application, but that there are variances, there are a number.
To your conclusions, you're not a professional planner. You can't opine on what is or what isn't a variance. That's the purview of Mr. Maskey and Miss Cafone.
Great. I'm curious as to how you're going to comply with this requirement. It doesn't say sidewalks unless you can't really put them in. It says there should be a comprehensive network of sidewalks. I don't see that on the plan. As a resident, I'm not a sidewalk expert. I'm not a planning expert or a variance expert. But I'm curious because the TECD is setting a vision for what the buildings built in the TECD should look like. And one of the things that it should look like is an interconnected network of sidewalks, the front, sides, and rear of the buildings. So maybe there's something wrong with your building if it doesn't fit in the TECD, if you in fact cannot comply with the TECD requirements. If you say, I can't put a sidewalk behind it, and the ordinance specifically says you need it, maybe there's something wrong with the building.
So this is why we're before the planning board. Planning boards and boards of adjustment grant relief when the applicant can demonstrate that that makes sense, that's logical. We meet our burden of proof. You're not going to put a sidewalk in front of a loading bay. And, by the way, the ordinance also permits 60% impervious. Should we redesign the project with 600,000 more square feet?
If you don't care about the neighborhood.
Well, that's why we're trying to be sensitive to this.
I'm
Fantastic.
I'm going to put a pause because we're well past the usual intermission time.
Okay.
I'm not seeing, this is going to go to the planner, so. So I'm it's 9:23 right now. We're going to take a recess, going to Verizon time till 9:33. Give 10 minutes because I know he's gone overboard at this point. So We'll reconvene in about 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've reconvened, except the two attorneys are talking. Okay.
And you know that, and Michael, you know that if he comes up with
We'll see how it goes. All right. We reconvene. I just want to remind everybody, 10 o'clock is the cutoff for any new testimony. 10:30 will be the hard stop. And remember, this is questions of Mr. Ford's testimony as it relates to engineering. So,
As it relates to his testimony.
which is engineering. Okay, David.
David Brook. I'm going to try to see if I can make sure everybody can hear me okay. On May 12th, there were a number of questions that residents asked, as well as members of the planning board, with regards to updating. One of the requests that was made was to present a visualization of what these buildings would look like from, I believe, the different neighborhoods that exist right now. And I went online, I haven't seen that. So my first question is that available for all of us to look at so that we can see? As you may recall, this building is at 100-foot elevation. It's going to be 40 feet tall, and that makes it, I think, a minimum of 60 feet taller than all the residences around. It might be more than 60.
Objection as to form.
Objection as to form. So the question is there an update that we can see? And I guess my other question is this now available was it uploaded?
Yes.
Yeah, this is a section exhibit. And I actually downloaded this from the township's website, Civic Clerk. And it shows two sections for the easterly building, one to the residents to the north and one to the residents to the east. And
Mr. Ford, just a moment, we're going to mark this exhibit. I don't know what our next.
You have a notation what the last exhibit was, Michael? So we can mark it. PA3.
This is A3.
All right. We'll mark this as A3. Mr. Ford, for purposes of the record, can you indicate what A3 represents?
Site section. And it's actually on the Civic Clerk, and we submitted it as an exhibit.
Who's the author and what's the date?
Van Cleef Engineering.
And the date on it?
My eyes are not that good, Michael.
Neither are mine, that's why I'm asking.
June 20th of this year.
Thank you.
Somehow I got the impression at the May 12th meeting that what was being asked of is not that, but that something that would show us as residents what we are going to see. And honestly, if that's what we are going to see, I am kind of like, either my glasses aren't working right or it doesn't help. It doesn't help to visualize. And I guess my question to the planning board is we'd like to know how many people are going to see this building. Is there some way that you can ask the applicant to present information, maybe float balloons, do something so that we're going to actually know what this looks like, because that doesn't help. And hopefully you all agree as lay people, that may be a great engineering drawing, but I don't even know which house that is. Does that tell us which house it is that this is from? It's not really going to help any of us understand the impact. I'm sorry. The other thing that was brought up, there were a number of things that were to be updated. And one of them related to the LSRP licensed site remediation professional. Is that person going to testify?
No.
Okay. Is there somebody that's going to provide updated information as it relates to the issues of the areas of concern on the Shockley well, that's the name right now, right, Shockley's property.
Mr. Brook, can you talk about Mr. Ford's testimony, please? You're questioning his testimony for right now. We got a lot of people that want to talk, and that's not his testimony. So,
Mr. Delcor, I appreciate that. The challenge is who is going to talk about contamination?
that's not the question. The question is, what did he talk about?
There was discussion about areas of concern, am I not mistaken, from the original testimony?
Those documents have been uploaded as well, as requested.
It's sort of a catch-22. If there's nobody who's going to testify, how are we going to get information?
Get to it.
Which, by the way, may be the same problem the board has, and
Right.
they'll have to deal with it accordingly.
So, Mr. Ford, did your firm provide? those
No, the
documents?
LSRP documents that I believe the gentleman's referring to were documents that were requested by one of the board members as a result of the Environmental Commission hearing where this
Julian.
particular
Yeah.
topic was discussed. And those documents have been provided and they're available on Civic Clerk as well.
Okay.
And since we provided those documents 10 days in advance of the hearing, we haven't received any comments or requests for additional information.
Right, and since Mr. Julian's most likely the source of that request, I would be prepared. Next time, we're going to wind up reconvening, and I'm sure Mr. Julian will be here, that someone here should be able to speak to that. So, move on.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other question related to what I call the Pinter property, the larger tract. When you go back in time, the health department received maybe literally hundreds of complaints with regards to odors, dumping, oil spills on that property. And
I object as to form. This is assuming facts that are not on the record, and it's not a cross-examined question of our civil engineer.
I hear you about the form of the question. The question is, has there been, and apparently there was, an environmental assessment that was done of the Pinter property? Is that correct, Mr. Ford?
That's not my area of expertise. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Is there going to be someone who will provide information as it relates to the Pinter property, since I do not believe any of that was provided to the Environmental Commission?
If the board so requests testimony from our environmental professionals, then we'll provide it. Generally, you rely on the reports. They're very thorough, and they're on Civic Clerk. And it addresses all the issues that you've raised regarding the areas of concern.
Civic Clerk is what these documents are posted to. There's no document that relates to Pinter on Civic Clerk.
Mr. Obradnik, I see on Civic Clerk a phase 1 and a phase 2 study. Are those properties included in those?
Yes.
Does that include Pinter? I'm sorry,
That's
Mr. Lapone.
He's indicating yes.
Okay.
So if on Civic Clerk, there is a phase 2 from Synergy Environmental dated June of 2022. And
I'm sorry, dated what?
June of 2022.
Okay.
Phase 1 dated.
I think that was 2021.
2022.
Okay.
It's slow to upload here.
It's July 1.
July 1 of 21, the original phase 1.
Yes, I saw that. Okay, I'll look at the other one. Thank you very much.
I'm Carmel Meyer, 266 Fairfield Lane. And what I would like to bring up is I have pulled up the aforementioned TECD zoning document ordinance from Hillsborough. And under allowed uses, it clearly states on number 5, it is allowed uses warehousing, shipping, and receiving located completely within an enclosed building. And I am wondering how it is that the building design accommodates that for warehousing and shipping. So again, emphasis on completely enclosed building.
Yeah, that actually was another question, I think, raised by one of the prior speakers, and would have the architect address that.
This is the exact wording. Oh, I thought
That
the building
speaks to the
design.
operation of the building, yes.
So you aren't part of the building design.
That's an architectural question, ma'am.
Okay, we'll bring it up again.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Joe O'Connell. I live at 20 White Meadow Road.
Ma'am, you're gonna need to move.
Can you hear me?
Yep. It doesn't bite. You need to get a little closer to it. It doesn't bite.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That's
good. Okay, all right. So, just as a little, my house predates most of the houses around there. It's over 200 years old. It was the original farmhouse in that area. And I've learned a lot since they've built other things, including what people thought was going to happen and then what actually did happen. And my house is like at the bottom of an amphitheater, so everything flows down to my house. When the neighbors have a fire pit or a barbecue, it winds up in my front yard because just the topography of the land. The water from Hurricane Ida made a river that came down right through the middle of my front yard. It just does that. So my question is, like, I know that truck fumes, the oil, the debris that, like that the trucks give out, and when you, the water will flow through that. The light pollution, I was at off of Weston Canal Road, there's a big factory there, and I was there at 11 o'clock at night, and it was still going full force, which this kind of seems to be that type of operation, which I don't think is fitting in the zone, but that's another thing. The noise, the trucks backing up, beep, 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 at 2 or 3 in the morning, that sort of thing, that all is going to flow down. And is there any way to mitigate any of that? The noise or the pollution or anything coming down to the neighborhoods? Or that's just something that, I mean, I have to live with it with the neighbors, but that's a sporadic thing. They don't have a fire pit going 24/7. They don't have, wild parties going 24/7, noise backing up 24/7, which this very well could have.
There is a township noise ordinance that the applicant would, or anybody that occupies the facility would be required to adhere to.
Okay. And on mitigation, I mean, I've heard that you say, all the different things with the impervious surfaces. I did listen to when it was before the environmental committee, and at least one of the people, I'm trying to remember his name, but was kind of explained the extreme amount of water that would be shed by this property, even though, I mean, you're talking volume held over time, and I know you've got detention basins, but we've had 3 100-year plus storms in basically 23 years, Ida, Floyd, and Irene, I think it was. And they have made basically Hillsborough an island. And this particular area downstream is particularly vulnerable. We had, from the Oprah request, I found there were more than 25 cars flooded in the Amwell, Willow, North Willow corridor, flooded to the point that people barely got out of their cars. One person did not make it out. Clerico Lane was completely flooded. My property, that's where, when I talked about the river, it goes down and curves and becomes the river that goes on Clerico Lane. And I don't know that there's enough mitigation that you could put in, or other things that you could put in to help slow that water down or do anything. I mean, I know the detention basin that they put in on White Meadow on the first storm before the houses were even built, Floyd by noon that day, and the flood, I mean, we're not even talking days of rain. We're talking that one day. By noon, that basin was completely full and overflowing, and the storm was only starting. So I don't see how what you're putting in could help mitigate that.
As I said, we're bound by the regulations. We've complied with the regulations. We've far exceeded them to the extent I referenced. Understand you're located on White Meadow in the middle?
In the middle.
Right, so stormwater from this site would flow into the streams between this site and that site. In order for any water to get from this property to you, it would actually have to cross White Meadow Road. That doesn't seem conceivable.
Well, when the storm drains back up, yeah, it does. And that, I'm right on the conservation easement, which does back up.
And the stormwater detention basin in your neighborhood is located on the east, or the east side of
It's on
the Royce Bridge.
Well, it's north of me.
Right where I'm highlighting here on the plan, just off the site.
Yeah.
But
And-
we've endeavored to comply with the regulations. We've exceeded
you-
them, and
And that doesn't necessarily mean, because you were talking about a 3-year storm or a 10-year storm, but you really haven't. So there's no real
there's
recourse.
a 2, 10, and 100-year storm. The 100-year storm would be the most severe, and we're
No,
required
a
to.
500-year storm is more severe.
Well, that's
That was
that's
Ida.
the design parameters that are
Right,
dictated to us by DEP and the codes.
But like on North Willow, the height of the water exceeded 5 feet on the road. So that's pretty, all right. And even if you put time restrictions in on the operational of this, that was done in another warehouse. And what happened was that the trucks were lining up at 6, 5, 7 o'clock in the morning, waiting for the thing, and they were blocking all the side streets. What would you be able to do to prevent that sort of thing from happening?
I think I would defer to our traffic engineer that would hopefully
Would do
testify
that.
soon. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
John Lanahan, 43 Winding Way. Promise, I just have a couple quick questions. That up there, that's intended to be the visual simulation that was agreed to at the last meeting, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
How were the houses determined or selected? Because my understanding from the reviewing the video, it was supposed to be a visual simulation so that the neighbors could determine or see what it would look like. I know you've selected 2 houses up there. Don't mind, just to make this-
I can answer your question, is what I
My
recall.
house is right, I just want you to run it.
Okay. Yeah, at the last hearing, I understood there was a request from, and I thought it was one of the residents from White Meadow, and in particular, the reference of the view toward the project and even across the Texas Eastern Pipeline, and then a second view from the Winding Way. And we selected our closest resident.
But, so the challenge is, right, my house is on the one lot I just showed you. It's one of the higher houses in the neighborhood, right? The house next to me is also elevated pretty high. So I understand you selected a close house on Winding Way. The house on White Meadow is a far distance. So I'm just curious, goes back to the question earlier tonight, is why not is there a reason why we didn't create a visual simulation for all the surrounding houses?
Well, I don't recall that there was a request for every single one, and
Yeah, admittedly,
we followed
the word was neighbors, neighborhood. So there was, to your point, there was no
right.
identified property. I guess my question is, I can tell you that the house you selected, northwest, south, the one on the right over there, as you should point out, a lot of trees, one straight across. But if you look at all those, the rest of the houses in the other rest of the neighborhood, it's a straight shot. And so as it stands now, we can hear light, we can see lights, especially in the fall, the winter. We can hear sounds all year long. And so now we're talking about a much larger structure. And so I just go back to my point. I'm a little, admittedly, disappointed that we don't have a visual simulation that takes into account the rest of the neighborhood. But I understand your approach. I just disagree with the approach, that's all. I would just ask the board to consider a revised simulation to show the impact on the rest of the surrounding neighborhood, because it appears to me to be selective on what was chosen, how it was chosen. That's it. I told you I'd be quick. All right. Thank you.
So I hope it's okay. I did have a couple more questions.
What's your name again?
Oh, Brian Tarantino, 235 Fairfield Lane. G. Yeah. So, and just to continue the discussion around the TECD, and there's a couple that I'm holding for the architect because they are more architectural questions. So I just asked about section F3L, which talked about a comprehensive network of sidewalks. But interestingly, the TECD ordinance goes further. And if you look at section F4E, it says common areas such shall be accessible from all buildings and connected by an on-site pedestrian circulation system. Sidewalks and plazas should be made comfortable for use by pedestrians through the use of landscaping, overhangs, and canopies in order to provide shade. In fact, not only are there no pedestrian paths to common areas for these buildings, the plan provides for no such common areas like gazebos, benches, walking paths, patios, and fountains. Why have you omitted these features?
I'm going to defer to the planner regarding that. Let them deal with it address it with their testimony, just like your prior question.
Okay, all right. So I'll come back up when the planner is after the planner testifies. I think this one does pertain to your testimony, talking about landscaping. Section F6A says where loading, outdoor storage, and service areas are adjacent to residential uses or public rights of way, an earthen berm no less than 4 feet in height containing at a minimum evergreen trees planted at intervals of 20 feet on center and 7 evergreen shrubs per tree shall be provided.
Our landscape architect has designed it in accordance with the code, and with regards to that specific section, I'm not aware of any non-compliance.
Earthen, specifically, I'm sure you have the right.
Well, you're reading it. I'm unfortunately not looking at the code. But like I said already, we have agreed to comply with all the landscape buffering. The residential buffering required along the residential area is 100-foot width. We far exceeded that. We've provided plantings. We're not disturbing the existing plantings.
Yeah.
And if there are other issues.
Well, the issue is an earthen berm no less than 4 feet in height shall be provided.
Yes, I would like to review that with our landscape architect. I don't recall that a berm and no other option is permitted. So.
Okay, great. I'd look forward to your response to that. That would be great. I have one more TECD question. So the ordinance states at the very beginning that.
Can I just, so yes. Your prior question, you feel we're non-compliant in what way?
I didn't see on the plan a 4-foot earthen berm.
Okay, all right.
Where there's parking and loading between that and the residential areas.
So that would not include this driveway. That would be the parking along the front. And I know we do have a berm along the front. and then the loading in the back.
Sorry, I'm just finding it again. Where loading, outdoor storage, and service areas are adjacent to residential uses.
Okay.
Or public rights of way. Okay, so
Understood.
that's where you would need the earth and berm.
Right.
Okay. Last question on TECD for you, from me, is the ordinance states that all uses shall be provided at a scale and size that is appropriate for the district. Please explain how these two buildings, one of which would be the second largest building in the entire township, is at a scale and size appropriate for the district.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to the planner on that as well. Yeah,
Awesome. Excellent. Well,
appreciate it.
thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
You gotta take a number.
Yeah.
Susan Gulliford, Hunt Club Road. I have one question about your exchange with Mr. Pissarro this evening. You said you had test pits dug and not recorded. It seems as though if you have more pits, you have more accuracy. So why would you decide to put the work into doing some of the test pits and not provide the results?
I'm saying occasionally when you're doing soil testing, you wouldn't record something if you're not going to use the data, no, or report it in a report.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I have, you'll be glad to hear this, a stormwater management question. At the March 28th Environmental Commission meeting, Mr. Robinson, the applicant's LSRP, mentioned that he had 25 areas of concern, most of them located where the businesses are right now, those large pole barns, I guess they're there, where the trucks park. Now, if you drive westbound on the road, you can see a large area that's eroded coming from behind the barn closest to the road. So my question is, with your stormwater management plan, there's that steep slope that I'm talking about from behind that barn. Would your stormwater management plan clean up that area, take care of that area of erosion and stop it from going down that eroded area into the stream at the bottom of the erosion?
I think you're referring to an area at this point. Right. The short answer is yes. We're not proposing any discharges there. This would be a curved driveway to capture the runoff and send it to the rear where the basin is proposed. And there actually is disturbances closer to this stream today from the current activity that would be removed and that area be revegetated. And that would include that area where there's an existing erosion.
Okay, so you will be correcting that. What about any contamination that would come down from those areas of concern into that area and go into the stream, even though that's off-site?
The contamination issues and how the existing environmental concerns on that property are being addressed would be an appropriate question for the LSRP.
Oh, so your LSRP will be testifying then?
The short answer is that there will be a cleanup, so the environmental conditions will be cleaned up before this project is constructed. So there would be an improvement over the existing environmental conditions in the areas of concern identified in both the Phase 1 and the Phase 2 reports.
Okay, when the LSRP, the applicant's LSRP was in front of the Environmental Commission, he couldn't present his report, his completed report to them that evening because it had not been yet submitted to the township. And now that it's submitted to the township, will he be in front of the Environmental Commission again? Because they are an extraordinary group of people who would understand that report much more than the rest of us would. In fact, one of the members of that Environmental Commission is an LSRP.
That's the reason we submitted it, because the Environmental Commission requested it. So now the Environmental Commission would have that data.
So
And to the extent they have questions about it.
you would go back before them?
We haven't, I don't know that we've been asked to come back. I would say that'd be a township decision.
Okay, thank you. I hope that they do decide that.
Hello, good evening. Alicia Gabriel-Bayless. I live on Huff Lane in Hillsborough. So I came here today to ask about your fiscal impact statement. I understand that's not your cup of tea. But in hearing what you're talking about and hearing the residents' concerns, I was just wondering, and also I attended a stormwater management presentation at one point. They mentioned that one way to deal with water is to have these really big pipes underneath. And that would hold the water. So if you have a lot of water, the water would go into the pipes and it would basically stay there until it can disseminate outward. So have you thought about doing that at all?
You're talking about probably an underground basin. We have 2 above ground basins in this, or 3 above ground basins in this case. So we're not proposing that.
Would you consider that, or I guess you just think the above ground ones would be sufficient?
Well, the underground provides volume just like the above ground basin would provide volume. So in this case, we're providing the volume. It's just not hidden under a paved surface.
And I guess when you went to the environmental commission, they didn't ask for that?
Not that I recall that they wanted something.
They didn't think it was needed, maybe. Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
David Brook. Mr. Ogrodnik, you just stated, as it relates to the LSRP, that the site will be cleaned up before the building is up. Is that correct? Are you saying that?
I'm not going to testify.
You just made a statement to somebody who asked a question that the remediation was going to take care of it.
I don't have to answer your questions. I'm not the witness. Mr. Ford is the witness.
Mr. Ford didn't make the statement. You did. Mr. Ford, do you know that the site is going to be cleaned up before the building is up?
I don't know the timing of the cleanup. I know that the applicants engaged in LSRP to look at the existing environmental concerns, nothing to do with the proposed project, but the existing environmental concerns.
So apparently Mr. Ogrodnik is testifying because he made a statement to the former person who asked that question. Groundwater contamination can take years to clean up. Is there groundwater contamination at this site? Do you know?
You'd have to refer to the professional, the LSRP professional, and the reports that you didn't read yet, apparently.
It's somewhat.
Grodnick, can you make sure that the LSRP is available to answer questions at our next meeting?
Sure.
Thank you very much.
I would also suggest that Mr. Ogrodnik be tamed or stated that making snide comments is not a polite thing in a public hearing. Okay, I haven't made any snide comments to Mr. Ogrodnik. I am just stating that he made a statement that it would be cleaned up. I think that's fallacious or it should be stricken from the record because it's not true. He's not the witness. Thank you.
Bob Hollingshead, 31 Winding Way. Mr. Ford,
Yeah, talking to Mike, Bob.
am I right when I say that the site of the larger warehouse is 100 feet above some of the residences?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. Can you?
You have to just speak up.
I'm asking if the site of the larger warehouse is 100 feet above some of the residences' properties.
We have a topographic map, and this cross-section I'm going to zoom in on now is, I think, to our the houses down around elevation 80 and the proposed buildings at 100. So that's a 20-foot difference.
20-foot difference. Okay, then, so if you have lights that are 15 foot tall, they're actually 35 foot above.
If you look at this illustration that's actually up there now, and it shows the actual light with the line of sight from that residence that's 550 feet away from the building.
So it looks like it hits the house.
No, this is the line of sight from the second floor toward the building, and where you'd have to look to be able to see the top of the light and the vegetation that it goes through.
Okay, and as far as the buffering or planting of trees, how are we planning to do anything along the 175-foot wide pipeline easement that all our backyards are right against, that we can see all the way to your site and beyond?
Yeah, let me zoom back out again. The second exhibit at the top here shows and actually illustrates that gap in the landscape where the Texas Eastern Pipeline is and the landscaping or the existing vegetation that's on our site that's not being disturbed, and then the vegetation that's closer to the residents, and then the vegetation that's on our site and closer to the proposed activity on the other side of the pipeline, as well as the proposed plantings. So there's a substantial amount of landscaping beyond both sides of the Texas Eastern Pipeline.
But if you look through that opening, you'll look through many people's backyards. And you know there'll be nothing in between. Plus, the noise runs up to that alley like an amplifier. So there's no way to solve that, is what you're saying.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that I'm looking at the aerial exhibit at the top now. This is the stream that crosses through the property. Here's the Texas Eastern Pipelines. There's all this existing vegetation that's beyond any critical area that could be developed, but is not proposed to be developed. That would be left in its natural state.
Well, let me say it another way. If the people that live along the pipeline go in their backyards and look towards the site, they'll look through the site and beyond. There's nothing in between, and nothing can be planted in between.
You're correct. The gas pipeline easement would preclude plantings.
Okay, thank you.
Do we close the public? So we close?
Motion to close public as to Mr. Ford.
Right.
Unless there's any other questions.
Okay, so we are just about out of time. One last bite at the apple with this witness. Otherwise, we will close to public. Someone make a motion? Oh, yes,
I don't
sir.
necessarily have a question, I just like
So,
to.
Mike.
Yeah, Mike, yeah.
So again, Mike Pissarro from the Watershed Institute. I don't necessarily have a question for the witness, but just sort of a procedural issue. During the break, we were discussing the soil test pits for the stormwater management system. They have not been provided. I understand they will be provided, but can there be a commitment to have Mr. Ford available maybe at the next hearing in case there are questions regarding those soil logs that we've not had a chance to review and study?
I think it's a reasonable request. You're an objector, so Mr. Ford should be available to answer any questions that an objector has.
We can comply with that. I would also likewise, Mr. Chairman, to request that if there's any professional reports filed by the objector, that they be submitted at least 10 days prior to the hearing, consistent with other applications with objectors. And we reserve our right to reintroduce Mr. Ford or any other witnesses that would be able to adequately address some of the comments made by the objectors.
Of course.
We will certainly provide a report, Dr. Emerson. The one sort of hesitation on the 10 days is if the applicant submits additional or revisions 10 days ahead of time. It's kind of hard to submit a report on something that, simultaneously. But we will definitely provide it before a hearing.
If there becomes the general rule is 10 days before. If there becomes an issue in terms of who's, if it shows up on day 10, we'll have a conversation about it. So far, Mr. Ogrodnik and other objectors have worked these things out after about 17 emails, but they have worked them out.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
The same thing applies. I don't see Mr. Gross around. Same thing applies for your expert witness at the appropriate time. Well,
Well, before I make a motion to close, even though Mr. Ford's testimony is officially closed, at the very end of everything, there's one last chance to make your statement or ask any particular question. So if something should come up to a meeting from now, whatever, you still have that ability at the very end to state whatever you want to state. Okay, so it's not like you'll never get to talk to him again. He's always going to, okay? So with that, I'll make a motion to close for this testimony.
There's a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Still subject to possible reopening as
Right.
per the discussions on the record.
Okay. So at this point, we are past 10 o'clock, so there'll be no new witnesses this evening. So I think what we need to discuss is an extension of time of decision. Right, but first we need to know if
The
there's,
next date, yes. The next available agenda is October 6th, followed by November 3rd.
Michael?
Did you catch the date? Did you catch the date?
October 6th and November.
Or November 3rd?
Is September 1st available?
No.
October 6th, November 3rd.
In fact, I think you'll be here on September 1st, Michael.
Say that again. Sorry.
You might be here on September 1st for
Oh.
something else.
Right. If not, though, can we put on the record now that we don't have to renotice if this application gets moved to September 1st?
It's not being moved to September 1st.
Okay. Even if that other application doesn't go forward?
You can't play with the dates like that. You gotta tell us now. If you're gonna tell me the other application we're discussing has been pulled, tell me now.
I have to talk to my co-counsel.
It's too late. We have to know tonight.
Yeah.
October 6th, if you agreed to October 6th, there would be not an additional notice.
Yeah, that's fine, Mr. Maskey. We do have some experts coming in from out of state, so we appreciate maybe getting through those witnesses and collectively asking questions, but I'll defer to Mr. Bernstein and the chairman. We have our traffic, Gary Dean, we have,
Mr. Dean's right
Larry-
around the corner, so he doesn't.
well, yes, we have Larry Valenza coming in from Ohio, who is our architect. And
Or it's like-
we also have our planner.
Well, I would suggest on October 6th to do your people from out of state first.
All right, well,
Yeah.
he's going to be away that week, so we're gonna try to get through traffic and planning perhaps on that day, on October 6th.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
I'm going to ask that the board authorize an executive session at either the September 1st or the September 8th meeting, so that I can go over with the board my thoughts on the other issues that we've discussed regarding the subdivision prior to the next hearing. Mr. Obradnik.
Red color.
Executive before.
Be a good idea.
If you want,
Open up.
It's gonna be a long meeting.
Do we need to motion that?
I need a motion to authorize.
A motion to authorize executive.
You want to do it the 8th, you can do it the 8th too. Whichever.
And possibly the 8th. Let's authorize executive sessions for both days to give us flexibility.
Second.
Attorney-client privilege.
All right. Do we need to do a roll call or can we do it? Okay. Roll call, please.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Chigarelli? Ms.
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Committeeman Delcor?
Yes.
Mayor LaPlante?
Yes.
Chair Sarachi?
Yes.
We now need a motion, Mr. Chairman, to continue this application to Thursday, October the 6th, 2022 at 7:30 PM or as soon as thereafter as the matter may be heard without further notice.
All right, but an extension of the time of
An
decision.
extension of time to the end of October at least.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any comments? Roll call, please.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Chigarelli?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Committeeman Delcor?
Yes.
Mayor LaPlante?
Yes.
Chair Sarachi?
Yes. Okay. So with that, our next meeting is next Thursday on the 14th.
And we have an application and for a change not with Mr. Obradnik. He gets the week off.
Okay, so
But
with,
Christine will be here for that one.
all right.
She probably won't testify that night, but she'll be here.
All right, so with that, we have I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
Absolutely.
Second.
All in favor? Aye, we're adjourned. See you next week.